Good evening and welcome to Greater Somerville for May 3rd, 2011. I'm Joe Lynch. My guest tonight is Tom Bok, a neighborhood organizer from the Davis Square area of Ward 6. Intense infill development has been a way of life here in Somerville for over 10 years now. Our lack of available building lots which conform to current zoning laws has led to many contentious issues in almost every city neighborhood. From Teal Square to Davis, from the Max Pack development to Boynton Yard reuse, and from the massive Assembly Square build-out to small lot redevelopment on residential streets in some of our most densely built neighborhoods, new residential and commercial building often pits neighbor against developer, neighbor against neighbor, and sometimes developer against the city. One such development that has the elements of all three entities pitted against each other is the Summer Street development just outside of Davis Square. To talk about that development tonight, it is my pleasure to welcome to Greater Somerville Tom Bok, an advocate for the sensible redevelopment of the site on Summer Street. He and his family make their home on Summer Street in the Davis Square section. Pleasure to welcome you.
Likewise.
We're going to talk about something, Tom, that everyone who watches this show has faced in this city, one time or another. Whether we're talking about major redevelopment at Assembly Square, Union Square rezoning, Winter Hill rezoning, in my neck of the woods, the Max Pack site with 199 residential condominiums. We're going to give the chance for the smaller developments that tend to be a little contentious in neighborhoods. So I'm glad you came on, and we're going to talk about that for a little bit with the folks at home. I asked Tom if he wanted to take phone calls tonight, and he said sure, but give us about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then I'll put the phone number up on the screen and we can do that. Tom, set us up a little bit on where this site is located on Summer Street.
Okay, so if you're familiar with Davis Square, the site is just adjacent to the Dilboy Post, the VFW post. That is on the southeast edge of Davis Square as you're moving out toward Porter Square.
Behind the Winter Hill Bank, the Art Deco Winter Hill Bank building on the corner.
Yep, exactly.
Up by where the new building is going beside the diner.
Right.
Yep, on that opposite corner is the Art Deco Winter Hill Bank building. Dilboy Post is in the basement of that building.
Right.
Behind that is a rather large parking lot.
Right.
And adjacent to that, many people who drive up Summer Street look off to the left and they see this kind of concrete wall. That is an air shaft and an emergency egress for the MBTA's Red Line tunnel that runs underneath.
That's right.
Have I set it up right?
You've done your homework.
There you go.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the proposal in question is for combining two lots. So you've got the Dilboy parking lot, approximately 23,000 square feet, and they want to merge that together with that shaft site, which is effectively a big patch of weeds and Somerville wildlife. So the plan is to merge that, make a 40,000 square foot lot, put up a VFW post on there, a brand new Dilboy Post, which is a two-story building, first floor, function hall, second floor, the post's members area with
kind of the private quarters for the members.
Exactly, yeah. with another bar up there and a game room, things like that. And then a building, a three-story, 31-unit condominium complex, which is sort of behind and just sort of around that, kind of snuggles next to it, if you will. That is as I said, 31 units, and that is really the point of contention. The VFW post, there's because of the issue with that parcel, because of the fact it's very close to a lot of residences. I mean, part of that parcel really essentially extends into a completely residential neighborhood zoned RA. So there's always going to be some concerns about noise and hours and things like that related to the post. But by and large, it's really the condominium complex where that's where the smoke is coming from.
So is it fair to say that the neighbors they're pretty accustomed to having the Dilboy folks as their neighbor?
That's right.
They've been there for years. So the issue really is not the Dilboy Post. The issue is what's coming in with the 31 units of residential housing.
Right. I mean, I'll speak just for myself personally. The Dilboy Post is a good neighbor, and they, I'm going to run in the Mom's Run on Sunday. We vote there. We've gone to functions there. I can't cite any example where I've seen something or heard something at the Dilboy Post. Other neighbors have mentioned issues in the parking lot, but I think by and large people are comfortable with the Dilboy Post there, and I think people feel, look, they own the parking lot, it's zoned central business district, they're entitled to put up a new post there.
So that's one of the key things that I think folks who are going to watch this show and folks who are listening is that Dilboy actually owns that parking lot.
Right.
That's part of their condominium, if you will.
Right.
Because that bank building is two different owners.
Yeah.
It's the Winter Hill Bank and the Dilboy Post. But the Dilboy Post happens to own the parking lot.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
So they just happen to have a very valuable asset.
Exactly.
And they're playing this asset with this developer that's down there.
Right. They're essentially turning that asset into a new post. They're
Gotcha.
allowing the developer to put up a condominium building on most of that parking lot in return for the developer also putting up a new post, on what remains
Sure.
Of that parking lot. And then in addition to that, they are getting the current shaft site for use as surface parking for the Dilboy Post.
Okay.
And they're giving up, as far as I understand, because again, this is a private deal. This isn't but the documents that I've seen say that they are giving up the current Dilboy Post, which is call it approximately a third of the building.
Yep. All located sub.
Well,
street
there's
level.
a function hall street level, and then there's the bar,
Okay.
which is sub street level. So they're giving that up to the developer, who can then turn around and sell it. And there's some conditions on the sale, but effectively it's the developer's property to sell at that point.
Okay. So we've set it up. I hope everybody understands where it is. So now the issue comes down to about 10 years ago, there was a developer who came in. Originally, the only parcel he owned was that vacant grass-strewn lot behind the shaft.
Right.
There was a lawsuit that was filed by one of the abutters. The abutter lost the lawsuit, and that was 14 units that this first developer wanted to build. Time goes on, developer changes his name, gets other partners in there, and comes back and says, I have a new plan. So I think that's kind of where 2006, 2007, somewhere in that time frame?
Yeah, the new plan emerged, I would say, more like 2009.
Okay.
But yeah, that's about the time frame.
Okay.
And so it sort of mixed in there around 2008. That's when things really degenerated. That's when finally they were trying, having won the lawsuit, they were trying to put up the building. It came down to a shade tree that was on Summer Street,
Yep.
and they had to move that. And the reason they had to move it, frankly, was because the size of the building took up effectively their entire lot. So if they wanted to put a fire lane in, it would have to go next door. So they got an easement to allow them to put up a fire lane through the VFW parking lot. And in order to do that, they had to put in a curb cut and move a shade tree to make way for that fire lane.
So I didn't, I think you saw my intro when I sent it out to the media. That was one thing I forgot to put in there. I talked about Winter Hill Bank, Dilboy Post, a dentist. I'm not going to mention his name. I know who he is, but this, I don't want to embarrass him. But a dentist, and I forgot the shade tree.
The shade tree.
I forgot to put it in
Crucial.
there. Who knew a shade tree could stop a development dead in its tracks?
And so the shade tree stopped the project. The mayor upheld it. The mayor said no, the tree is going to stay. And from that point on, it degenerated a little bit. The mayor ended up getting sued by the developer. The Ward 6 alderman got sued by the developer. And it's safe to say that was probably the low point of the relationship between the city and the developer. And then about 2 years later, the developer came back with this much larger proposal, not only for the shaft site, but now also for the Dilboy parking lot.
To combine the parking lot.
Exactly. And what we saw at that point, I guess the one thing that caught us off guard was that the city had really done kind of a 180 at that point. The city, we sort of turned to them, okay, we've seen this proposal, at least, the early tentative details of it. And we wanted to know from the city's perspective, what are you going to do about the issue this, or, issue 1, issue 2, issue 3 that we have? And what we got back was kind of like a shrug, basically saying, well, we don't have a problem with it.
And I should say, Tom, you're here as one of the spokespeople for a bunch of neighbors, not just for yourself because you live on Summer Street, but there are many residential abutters to those two properties that we're talking about.
Right.
And they've attended meeting after meeting after meeting, and they've tried to negotiate with the developer. And, you know, I've followed it in the media, here in the paper, in the city. And, you know, sometimes those negotiations get hot.
Yep.
And then people get mad, and they walk away, and they say, we're never going to deal with them again. But it looks like the developer came back to the table again. And then, was it the city recognizing that the relationship had deteriorated and then recommended that you guys get mediation?
That's right. I think the city saw a long road of sort of
lawsuits.
Yeah, and sort of agony ahead if there wasn't some effort to reconcile the development with the city, or excuse me, with the community. Mm-hmm. And so they recommended a mediation process.
And how did that one go?
It didn't go so well. I mean, I think some things came out of it that were positive. So one of the issues that was raised at that time, the original proposal going into mediation featured the VFW post, the new post, on a portion of the property of the lot that was zoned residential A, and it was very close to some of the abutters. And I think the concern was, you know, the VFW, as I said, I mean, you know, my beef is really with the developer and with the condo building. It's not with the VFW. But, you know, realistically, you know, you've got a function hall and a bar, what amounts to an entertainment facility, and people didn't want that, 20 feet, 30 feet from their back porch. Mm-hmm. Especially with all the sort of the parking lot activity potentially afterwards and things like that. So that was one good thing, was just getting that VFW post moved out of RA and back onto the VFW parking lot where it really belonged.
Yeah, when you say RA, some of our viewers at home,
I'm sorry, yeah.
It's a zoning mechanism that the city uses.
Right.
Because that area that we're talking about is so close to the commercial district.
Right.
At some point you have to draw the line and say this is residential only.
Right, and this is residential A, which is the most restrictive zoning, residential zoning in the city. So effectively, it says, it's for, 1 and 2, family homes, and where any use has to be, convenient, and it uses the term, quiet neighborhood and things like that. So, some of that language really kind of bumped up against, the notion of a function hall hosting dances and things like that. And I think, justifiably, the city felt like, after hearing some of the neighbor complaints, it's time to ask the developer to move that back on RA. And to the developer's credit, they were willing to do so. And I would say the mediation was fairly successful in terms of getting, like, if you imagine kind of a monopoly board, if all that we were doing was sort of rearranging pieces on the board, those kinds of changes worked from a mediation perspective. The developer was willing to rearrange, again, to their credit. They weren't locked into the proposal. They were willing to go back to the designer and say, can you find a way to do this. What wasn't successful was taking units off the table, like, again, in monopoly, pulling the hotels off the board.
Sure.
When we were saying, we feel like we've got a just cause to say that this is too much, this is too big, that didn't end up changing.
So the city is big into metrics these days. They try to measure everything, and I think my experience, being on one of the community planning teams for MaxPac.
Yep.
Which is 199 residential units in the middle of our neighborhood. One of the things that the city does require are traffic analyses, if there are noise issues, noise abatement, mm-hmm. parking requirements, what's the other thing, utilities burden, if there's power, if you're using too much power for this new thing, or water and sewer capacity.
Right.
So did they require this developer to do all these things?
I believe they required some of those. So, for example, there has been a traffic study commission, but when we look at the traffic study, again, it's all in the eyes of the beholder, but it just doesn't look realistic to me. So we live in a street where at rush hour, Summer Street is one way.
Coming out of the square.
Coming out of Davis Square, at least for a block. Mm-hmm. And then most cars turn up onto Willow, which is also one way.
Right.
They put in a bike lane there. I applaud that. I ride my bike to work. But that is now effectively, only one lane. You just can't really fit sort of, 2 lanes of cars there. And what that means is Willow gets backed up at the light at rush hour. It backs up, onto Summer Street. And then we have, a very narrow street. and there's really no way around it. All the traffic has to feed into and out of Summer Street. You can't get around it. And we have a traffic study that effectively says, there's going to be no impact on the traffic. This sense of traffic in the neighborhood, the congestion, and that was just hard to swallow, I think, for the neighborhood. Similarly, the building addresses on paper a lot of the parking needs. So for example, they have underground parking that is adequate, again, on paper for the needs of the condominium owners, but a lot of the parking is tandem parking. So that means you've got, if you want to get the car and back out, you've got to kind of move the car in front first, and then kind of, and it's a lot of that kind of stuff.
When you say tandem parking, is tandem parking for individual units, or are they tandem parking for Unit A and Unit B?
For individual units, yep. So
husband and wife team have two cars in
right.
one spot.
Okay. And the concern is that, at least among the neighbors, that, again, you're talking about a narrow street with not a lot of parking, small side streets. Already it's difficult to park your car. There's a scarcity of spaces. And, if you have an awkward parking situation in the garage, as I think this building will, where it may just be easier to leave certain cars out in the street. If you're going to be only in the building for 2 hours, why go in there and
right.
juggle around?
And these folks are going to be entitled to have a Somerville resident parking sticker.
That's right, and visitor passes,
right.
all the works.
Right.
There are a number of visitor spots that are allocated in the building. The question is, is that going to be enough? 31 units, there could be, you only have to have one or two of the units having a party before the visitor spots are all gone.
Same issue we faced at MaxPac.
Right.
Most of the spots were supposed to be fully contained within, and residents down there raised the same issue. But what if, Unit 602 has a party for 75 people?
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to be parking on site. They're going to be parking on all the streets that surround us.
Right.
Traffic and parking will always be the key issues for any development that brings more people into a neighborhood.
Right.
Where do you go from here in terms of the traffic recommendation that the city is making?
Well, I think there's not much recourse that we have other than just to raise our concerns, our doubts publicly, in a public meeting. We're not going to go and commission a neighbor's traffic study and find an independent, firm to do that. But I think you can raise doubts about certain paragraphs, the wording of certain spots in the document, and just call it into question. I think that's all we can do.
Have you got any post-building mitigation built into your discussions with the city and with the developer, that if things don't work out the way that they're representing, that they would have to mitigate that traffic impact somehow?
We have not discussed that with them, so that hasn't been part of the discussion.
Yeah. Okay.
One of the issues in general, you touched on MaxPac and just density in general, is that what is becoming more clear to us as we go through this process is that you have very few spots like this one. This is possibly the only parcel of its kind in Davis Square, this undeveloped, still undeveloped parcel. And there's this sense of urgency on the city's part that we detect, where we need to get something in there, and not just something, not just a development, but something that's quite dense. And in fact, we think that the density of the condominium building that they're putting in is excessive, not just in our own eyes, but also in terms of what the zoning ordinance says. So with all of this, in any kind of a dense city, you're always going to have these issues where you've got the community taking a great interest in the building that's coming in next door because it's really in our backyard. Mm-hmm. And so of course there's this fine line, this fine balance between, on the one hand, letting the developer build what they want to build, and on the other hand, letting the protecting the neighbors against something excessive.
Sure.
We appeal to the zoning ordinance in that situation to address those kind of concerns. How big is too big? How much is too much? If my neighbor paints his house, pink with green trim, I might not like it. I can't say anything about it. But if the zoning ordinance says, there's a maximum density limit of X, I expect the city to uphold that, and I feel like they're not upholding it on this particular
And the city
project.
will always come back to you and they will say, as the governing authority, the ZBA has the authority to give variances. Mm-hmm. They have the authority to look at the zoning and say, is there hardship? is there something that we can do for the developer? So let me ask you a hard question. They don't call us the hot set for nothing. In your experience, over the past several years, working with your neighbors and working with the developer and being on the mediation team, you use the word urgency by the city to kind of get this vacant lot off the map. Mm-hmm. Do you think that if this were XYZ social club instead of a veterans club, that the city would be, this is a hot question, so if you don't want to answer it, don't answer it. You think the city would be as urgent to try to get the deal done? Could that explain the turnaround that the city had after they backed not taking down the tree? Now they're allowing for a much denser and a much more traffic congestion on Summer Street because of the entity of the Dilboy Post.
I don't know if I would say that. I mean, I think the veterans enjoy a well-deserved level of respect from the city and from the community that I think they get. And so yes, I mean, if this was a matter of the VFW saying, we'd like to put in this post, and we know, there's some issue that we're going to have to approach the city on. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't strike me as crazy if the city said, well, because of who these guys are and what they've done, we're going to cut a little slack here. But I think the city in this case is the slack is being cut more for the developer than the VFW. The VFW, as far as I'm concerned, this may be a deal that's good for them. I'm not positive it is. They're sort of the second. It seems like they're the second part of the package deal with this extremely large, extremely dense building, and that's really the piece where I feel like the city is essentially bending over backwards to try to accommodate this larger building, despite the fact that the zoning ordinance.
I'm going to put the phone number up there.
Great.
If anybody wants to give us a call, 617-628-9876. My guest tonight is Tom Bok. We're talking about the development on Summer Street behind the Winter Hill Bank Building, an ongoing saga, for the last 10 years for neighbors in that area. Let's go to one thing that I think everybody's questioning is, what is acceptable? Everybody asks the same question. I mean, we talked before the show. I've been through developments down in the Lagoon Square area. What is acceptable to the neighborhood? I mean, they're at 31. Do you move them back to 28?
So I think so. So first of all, what we're looking for, we're not looking for perfection. We're not looking for all development to go away and this to turn into kind of a park with fountains. We accept the fact that there is going to be a development. This is privately held land. They're entitled to develop it, and we understand that. We're realistic about it. I think what we would like is something sensible and rational to go up there, and those are rather vague terms. Let me be a little more specific. The developer in the two projects that I've seen, I mean, I'll call this. There's been lots of iterations, but basically it's been a 14 unit building on the shaft site, and now it's a 31 unit building on the combined site. So those two projects, the thing that they have in common, as far as I'm concerned, is that the projects are they're so dense that you run out of things that you can do to make these buildings nice. It's sort of like you've inflated the balloon so that it takes up every allowable square inch of space, and now you can't really add the details that you'd like to actually make it a nice building.
It's like walking in the canyons of New York. You never get to see the beauty of the buildings because you're so packed in.
That's right.
If you look straight up, maybe, but the aerial view is always much prettier in New York.
That's absolutely true. But that's one of the issues that we have. We'd like to see it come down, not only because we want less density, which then translates into less traffic, less parking issues, things like that. Right. But also because it allows them to build a nicer building, and ultimately, if I walk down the street, the first impression that I want people to have when they see this building is not, oh my gosh, that's huge. I mean, that to me, that's a problem. If everyone walked on the street just thinks that's enormous,
it's out of scale with the neighborhood.
Exactly. Yeah. And what I want is for the defining feature of this building to be, that's a pretty nice building. It fits in with the neighborhood. It doesn't have to be as small as the buildings around it, but it's in scale. It
always comes back to the question: can the developer make money by building a smaller, more attractive building?
That's right.
That's the question. So your neighborhood faces the same issues that every neighborhood in this city has faced. Since, we've become the city du jour, for a lot of people who want to move in here, and for people who have lived here their entire lives. They may have inherited property, or they may be selling mom and dad's house, or they may have held on to a vacant parcel. Everybody's trying to make a buck.
Right.
So the question comes down to, can this be salvaged between the relationship between the neighborhood and the developer? And I think you're going to get your answer. Your neighbors may get their answer pretty soon with the ZBA ruling that's coming up. When is that scheduled?
May 18th.
May 18th.
So Wednesday, May 18th. It's a ZBA hearing, City Hall. So that's an important date to know. I mean, people are interested. These are open meetings. They take public testimony, and we're certainly hoping to get a lot of neighbors out there to express their opinions, positive or negative. We have a petition signed by about 135 people so far that say we're opposed to it. We want something smaller. We want something less dense. And I think that's the prevailing view. If you go around and ring doorbells, is that people are just uncomfortable with the size.
Yep.
Again, and size translates into everything else. It's the aesthetics. It's just the fact that you can even boil it down to that long block of Summer Street from Cutter to Willow has about 31 dwelling units right now. So if you sort of count up all the houses and apartments, it's about 31 units.
Right.
Overnight, that doubles. I mean, that's going to make people uncomfortable, regardless of who actually moves in. That's a lot to swallow for the neighborhood.
My friend, MaxPac is 199 units being plunked down into the middle of a neighborhood. However, having worked on it, we saw the advantages of having that residential development right next to a T-stop. So I think, from our standpoint, we saw the merits of it. It's right beside the community path. It's right beside a proposed T-stop. And that tended to mitigate some of our fears. We're going to go off here, but I want to continue talking because on the internet side of this, there's a couple more questions I want to ask you about. If I lose my live viewers, happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there, and remember, stay safe and stay informed. My guest tonight is Tom Bok, a resident down on Summer Street, who is talking about the Summer Street proposed development behind the Winter Hill Bank in conjunction with Dilboy VFW Post. So as always, Somerville, stay safe, stay informed, but stay tuned on the World Wide Web. We can continue talking. They're going to take us off in about 10 seconds at this point. So, it's interesting when you do have vacant land in the city. Everybody eyes it, and they say, I wish they would do something with it. Mm-hmm. And then when a developer comes in and says, this is what I'd like to do, the immediate reaction to those folks who are used to having a vacant lot beside them or a ramshackle building is, well, wait a minute, that's not what we were talking about. We didn't mean that. We faced kind of the same issues down at MaxPac on several occasions.
Yeah.
And I would say to neighbors who would say to me, anything is better than what's there now. I said, be careful.
Be careful what you wish for.
Be careful what you wish for, and don't say that too loud.
Right.
So.
We certainly view it as an opportunity. Just as you said, it's a vacant lot. It's covered in weeds. Who knows what even lives inside those weeds? We're certainly looking forward to getting that building developed, some building developed. But that's where you stop and say, is this what we want?
Right.
And I think the answer from the neighborhood has been no.
Right.
So, in any case, we're certainly open to talking with the city, talking with the developer about other alternatives. We just want to see it, a smaller, less dense building, right. Nicer. Again, where the defining feature is something other than, wow, yeah. That's big.
Well, I think it's terrific. I think, any neighborhood association who works as diligently as that neighborhood group has been working, because I do know some of the abutters in the back there. Mm-hmm. And Jimmy Campano, who has a show right here on Scat TV. Jimmy's up at the corner.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and Jimmy looks at it and he says, "When are they going to stop developing? When are we going to lose the sunlight in Davis Square because of the amount of development that's going on?" But
right,
it's always going to be people who move into this city in the future are going to have to realize that development is here to stay for the next 30 years.
Right.
And whether that means the infill types of developments that you have going on or that we had in our neighborhood, or tear downs. Tear downs and combining parcels. That's going to begin. That's the next phase that will happen. And my fear is, with the city's constant search for new additional revenue, they're going to look at that and they're going to say that's the only way we can provide the vital basic services.
Yep.
Is to increase the amount of revenue. Right now, you have a fallow piece of land. It's generating a pittance in revenue.
Right. And I can certainly see that. I just feel like there needs to be a little more of a rational process on the part of the city to, throw its weight behind, or to choose the projects that it's going to throw its weight behind. This feels a little like, you look at it and you say, the city wants this to happen. Why? Like it doesn't make sense when you stop and kind of look at the details.
Right.
One thing. I mean, if we're still, are we still on the? I mean,
we're still recording, but I'm gonna sign off because I think there's something wrong here that we haven't gone to.
Okay.
Another commercial.
Can I give one plug?
Sure.
Which is there's a series of stories that have come out about the project. So if people want to read more, the website is called it's postsomerville.com. Just all one word, postsomerville.com. POST.
That's Tom Nash.
Tom Nash's stuff. Yeah, excellent articles, and I highly recommend people who are interested take a look.
Yeah, and we're going to put that on the Greater Somerville blog, as well. We'll link you directly to Tom Nash's stories about the Summer Ave redevelopment. That's it for tonight. Thanks for joining us. See you next week.
Thanks very much.